Amen. We'll just do a short recap of what we studied in our last presentation. We've just got a basic template for a standard reform line, and my question was, what waymark do you think is the most important? It's my contention that it's the increase of knowledge that's the most important waymark in a reform line. And then I added a little clause into that to say that the formalisation of the message is nothing more than the speaking or the going forth, if you like, of the increase of knowledge. We can mark the increase of knowledge as the conclusion of a message. You've got 25 years that takes you to the time period when Christ is about to return, according to William Miller. And I didn't give the reference before, but it's GC, I'll put it here. (329). Paragraph 2. He, William Miller, had devoted 2 years of study to the Bible when in 1818 he reached a solemn conviction that in about 25 years Christ would appear for the redemption of his people. So again, he brings up this concept, this idea that a reform line is all about redemption, and he speaks about the 25 years, the conclusion of the message, it's the binding of. The message is all complete here in 1818. There is nothing new afterwards. Then we saw that in 1831 to 33 he begins his public preaching of the message, and in 33 he's ordained. So we understand this to be the formalisation of the message. This is where he begins to speak. We then changed thoughts for a short while, and we went to Hebrews chapter 8 verse 10, which speaks about the new covenant. And there we saw that after the 70 weeks, which was allotted to the Jews, that God was going to enter into covenant with them. Whether or not they were going to accept or reject, it would be an end of sin. We didn't read the Bible verse to that, so we'll read that now. It's Daniel 9:24. Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. This happens in the 70th and the last week of the 490 years, where God's going to enter into covenant with his people. If they accept, they will put an end to sin. If they reject, God will divorce his people. They can carry on doing sin all their lives. It's not going to be recorded because they're eternally lost. We saw that Hebrews 8 is taken from Jeremiah chapter 31. We read from verse 27. And in that history, Jeremiah, remember when we study Old Testament stories or history, we should understand the literal context before making an end of the world or spiritual application, because it can aid us in understanding what happens and what doesn't happen. Hopefully we saw that yesterday when I asked what the vision was of Habakkuk chapter 2. So if we knew when Habakkuk was ministering what the situation was in Israel, in Judah at the time, and what the dynamics were, we would have plainly been able to see that it's the 25:20 that he's referring to when he is instructed to make the vision plain upon tables. And therefore we would have understood what the vision that's on the 1843 chart is, 25:20. So we discussed that. So in Jeremiah 31, he talks about the 70-year captivity followed by a covenant that God wants to enter into with his people after that period. And just want to read something. Now, when we compare Hebrews with Jeremiah, there was one slight difference that I didn't highlight at the time, which I'm going to in a moment. And that's Hebrews chapter 8, verse 9. Because Hebrews chapter 8, verse 9 is an added thought that is not really in the original passage from Jeremiah. So, we went to Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 33. It's talking about the 70 years. We then saw a prophecy in Kings, 70 years is 1260. And we go from the 70 years to the 1260, we see that just by the structure that we would have to see after the 1260, God would enter into covenant with his people. What I don't want us to be confused about is I'm not necessarily saying each of these waymarks are the same waymark. I noticed that it looked like my handwriting, so someone's obviously put something on the board. So I'm not saying it's not correct, but I'm just going to take that out. So I wasn't trying to say exactly that this is the identical waymark. I just want to show you a two-step structure. Okay? So I just want to make that clear. So we can see after the 1260s, God's entering into a covenant. We can take that from Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 33. And then we notice that 31 to 33, we're doing the same thing that we did. In 1818, we go to Deuteronomy 18:18. But here, in the year 1831 to 33, we can go to verses 31 to 33. And I'm saying that the formalization of the message, which is the same message as the increase of knowledge, has a different tone or aspect to it. Here it's a message of judgment, a warning. If you disobey the prophet, you will die. But this one is a message of mercy and comfort. To say, if you accept the message, God will give you the ability to have a new heart and to enter into this new covenant with him. It's the same message. If we have time, I won't bring it up now, but if we were to go to Prophets and Kings, then we would see how Ellen White portrays Habakkuk chapter 1 and chapter 2. She calls it a comforting message. This message of destruction here in the period of Zedekiah, she calls a comforting message. And the reason for that is that it has this duality about it, or this twofold, these two sides to it. It's a message of judgment and mercy. I'm sure you're aware that the Word of God is described as a double-edged sword that's able to divide asunder two things. If we have time, we could go through that, but it's a really interesting, it's an interesting thought, not studies, merely a thought. I'll try and put that in the back of my mind and we'll see if we can come to that. So we worked that out. Let's just go to Hebrews chapter 8, verse 9. So there's a new covenant that God's going to make with them. It says, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith the Lord. And if you remember, we brought up this point here when we said that this covenant they entered into was at Sinai, the beginning of the wilderness wanderings. And then we went to Galatians chapter 4, because we took the symbol of Sinai to mark an old covenant, which is what Paul's doing in Hebrews, and he does again in the book of Galatians. Remember that? No. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So let's go to Deuteronomy. Chapter 29. Because we can put another structure here. Deuteronomy 29. We're going to read from verse 1 to 13, but we're not going to read every verse. So if you're taking notes, you can just put 1 to 13, but I'm only going to skip through that passage. Deuteronomy 29 is at the end of the 40-year wilderness wandering. So it's at the end of this history. These are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, besides or in addition to the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. Horeb is another word for Sinai. So he made a covenant in Sinai. Are you okay with that? You already addressed that issue here. And now he's going to make another covenant with them when he gets to Moab. And Moab is just on the borders of Canaan. So this is the end of the 40-year wilderness wandering. And he's going to enter into covenant again with his people because they failed to enter into covenant correctly at Mount Sinai. Everybody familiar with that structure, with that logic? Yeah? We should all be familiar with it, I think. At Mount Sinai, he enters into covenant with the fathers, and now he's giving the children an opportunity. Remember what we read in Jeremiah? The fathers have ate sour grapes, but the children's teeth have been set on edge. But that proverb will no longer be used, because the children are not going to take the punishment for their fathers. And we see this actually portrayed in Deuteronomy. It's not something that's unique to Jeremiah's history, because God is going to give the children an opportunity to enter into covenant with him once again. These are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, beside the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. Verse 4. Verse 4 I want us to remember, to put it to the back of our minds. You'll see why when we read the verse, why it's an important verse. Yet the Lord hath not given you an heart to perceive, and eyes to see, and ears to hear, unto this day. So, I'm hoping that you have heard that kind of terminology before, when it talks about eyes to see, ears to hear. You can find it in many Bible verses, but ones we tend to go to are found in Isaiah and Matthew particularly. So we're going to spend some time looking at that. When it says in verse 4, yet the Lord has not given you a heart to perceive and eyes to see and ears to hear unto this day, how would you rephrase that? What does that verse mean? What does it mean unto this day? We'll go with that. What does it mean unto this day? Speak loud, someone. If I said unto this day. Speak louder, I can't hear.
Unto this day means from this day onwards.
So my brother says it means from this day onwards. Anyone else?
From before.
Okay, so my sisters disagree. So they say, if we did a line here, and this is the day, my sisters are saying it's this history, and my brother's saying it's this history. Often at prophecy schools, I get upset that often we just go through verses and we tell you what we think. There's very little opportunity for you to tell me what you think, and for you to make some kind of assessment of how you read Scripture. So So I've tried to do it a few times. I tried to intersperse it in at least my studies, my presentations here, to give you an opportunity to really think, how do you read the Bible? And you've noticed a few times that we have different understandings of how we read verses. Remember the field in Jeremiah 31? Many of us, well, some of us were saying this is something negative, whereas it really turns out to be something positive. So I want us to really think about how we read Scripture, not just in our own private studies, but even as we're going through a process school like this. It's really difficult because we go very quickly over the verses and we just read them. And I know you don't have time to actually analyse those verses, but we really need to make it a habit of trying to slow down and give our people opportunity to actually read the verse themselves and try and make an assessment of what that verse is saying, especially if it's key verses. And verse 4 is the key verse. So I want us to understand when it says unto this day, because it's important, I think. So I think I agree with the sisters. I don't know if we all agree, my brothers can see that now. It says, from that day unto this day, something's happened, and from now onwards it's going to be different. That's how I'm understanding this verse. Do we agree with that? Yes. Okay, so what was it unto this day? What was the problem? In fact, I'm going to call it the problem, so I'll say that for understanding. What is the problem up to this day? Okay, they can't see, they don't have ears, and whose fault is that? Whose fault is it? Their own fault. Sorry? The Father's fault. So what did it say at the beginning of the verse? It says the Lord's not given you. So now whose fault is it? It's God's fault, isn't it? Because God says, I didn't give you the ability to have an eye that can see, that have an ear that can hear, and a heart that can perceive. Yeah? So God's taking responsibility.
Yes.
Now my sister said, from that day to this.
Yes.
What would that day be? According to, if we bring in Jeremiah, and we bring in the stories that we've just spoken about, Hebrews chapter 8, what day would this be? The captivity of Horeb. Yeah? So this is Horeb, and this is Moab. So this is the 40-year wilderness wandering. Now this covenant that they entered into here, what was God's design? Was it meant to be a good one or a bad one? It's meant to be a good covenant, wasn't it? If it was meant to be a good covenant, then we could say, after the 430-year prophecy, what was God going to do? Enter into covenant. And this one would be Mount Sinai, wouldn't it? But they failed the test. They don't want to do that. So, this one was meant to be good, but it ends up being an old covenant. Then they're going to have 40 years of wilderness wandering, and then it's going to enter into covenant with them again as they enter into the promised land. Yeah? You're going to have circumcision introduced here. So we've got the 40 years, and we've got covenant. So you can see this concept or this idea of receiving a new heart after punishment is not some strange new doctrine. It's found over and over again in the scriptures. We're looking at the phrase those days, and Paul speaks about those days, Jeremiah speaks about those days, and you let me get away with making a parallel between the 70 equals the 1260. You let me get away with that. But the 1260 is also those days, isn't it? Yeah? So we'd go to Matthew 24. And we'd go to Mark 13. Matthew 24. I'll make sure I give you the right verses. So we begin at verse 19. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. So we've got those days marked in verse 19. Then we'll drop down to verse 22. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So the days of 22 are the same as the days of verse 19. In fact, we could have dropped back to verse 21, which speaks about the great tribulation, such as never was since the beginning of the world, to that time, no, nor ever shall be. So verse 22 talks about those days, and then it talks about the tribulation, and it talks about the shortening of the days. Are we all familiar with that sequence of event and that history? It begins in 538, goes to 1773, goes to 1798. You get a 25-year period at the very end of the 1260. You familiar with that? Yeah, that's one of the places that we get the 2520 is the conclusion of, sorry, not 2520, the 25 years is the conclusion of the 1260. So the last part of the 1260 and the last part of the conclusion is the binding of. Hence you can take the number 25 to be a binding of. That's one of the concepts and ideas that we get from that. And we're down to verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. So this is a nice, interesting verse. It talks about immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun shall be darkened. When does that happen? 1780. And the tribulation finished 1773. Yeah, 7 years before the dark day. And then it speaks about the moon, which is in the same year. And then it speaks about the stars shall fall. 1833. So, if we were to spend time in this passage, we'd be able to see how 1780 and 1833 relate to the time of the end and the Millerite history and what they mean. But we don't have time to do that. And, okay, so that's what we want to see from Matthew 24. We had 19, 22 and 29. And then Mark, it says virtually the same thing. So I'll just give you the verses of this. This is 19 and 20. We're not going to read these verses. So, not only the 70 parallel the 1260 for Protestant kings, but the 1260 are called those days as well. And we saw this covenant that was mentioned here in Deuteronomy. So let's go back to Deuteronomy 29 verse 4. Yet the Lord is taking responsibility for the mess that Israel finds itself in. Has not given you a heart to perceive, eyes to see, and ears to hear unto this day. Verse 5. And I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. You can see it was the 40 years. Your clothes are not waxen old upon you, and thy shoe is not waxen old upon thy foot. Verse 9. Keep therefore the words of this covenant, and do them, that ye may prosper in all that ye do. Verse 12. that thou shouldest enter into covenant with the Lord thy God, and into his oath, which the Lord thy God maketh with thee this day. Verse 13. That he may establish thee today for a people unto himself, and that he may be unto thee a God, as he hath said unto thee, and as he hath sworn unto thy fathers, Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So you know that this covenant that he's entering into is the same covenant that he entered into with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which we understand to be the new covenant. That's the terminology that we tend to use for the Abrahamic covenant, the new covenant, the covenant of promise that we spoke about in Galatians chapter 4. I want us to see that this entering into the new covenant is before the destruction of Jericho. We can mark the destruction of Jericho as the Sunday law. So before the Sunday law, God's going to enter into covenant with his people. Just as you get to the line of Christ, before AD 34, which can be considered the Sunday law, when public evangelism begins, God begins to enter into covenant with his people. So this entering into a covenant happens before the close of probation. I want us to see that. And we can describe this entering into covenant in many different ways, with different symbols. We can describe it with respect to marriage. We could describe it with respect to an army that's 100% obedience. We could describe it with respect to the construction of a building. We could describe it, and what's the third major theme that we use? We have given you marriage, and I've given you construction of buildings. What's the other one that we use very often, that the Bible speaks about it over and over again? A different model. We have the model of marriage, we have the model of building, and what's the other one that we use? Agriculture. They're the three main ones that we use over again. So if you ever see any Bible verses that have any agricultural or building or marriage terminology into it, that's in those verses, study those verses carefully and the verses surrounding them, and you'll glean a lot of light from those verses, because we know that all scripture is profitable for us at the end of the world, but those verses are particularly easy to see and to interrogate if you can see those three models, one of those three: buildings, marriages, or agriculture. Perhaps the easiest one to see is the subject of building. If we were to go to this time period here, you've come out of the 70 years and God's going to enter into covenant with his people, and you're going to get the three decrees: Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes is the third and final step. Close of probation, we might say, 1844, October 22nd. Sunday law. Agree with that? Depending on what fractal level you're speaking of, if it's the priests, Levites, or Nethinims, or if it's the church and the world. So if you think about the church and the world, and you're just thinking about the church, then it would be the Sunday law. Everybody can conceptualize what I'm talking about, or is that too confusing? I'll move on if nobody says otherwise and explain it. Explain that? So, we mark the close of probation. Now, depending on what class of people you're speaking of, the close of probation is a different event or a different date. So, if we were speaking about the whole world as a person, an individual person, let's get the whole world, 7 million people, and turn them into a singular person. Where would we mark the close of probation for that person? Daniel 12:1, yes? When Michael stands up. So did you know Daniel 12:1 here? Now if we were thinking about the Nethinims, or the 11th hour workers, or the world, the Gentiles, where would we mark that close of probation? What way mark would we call that? It's a Sunday law? Any other answers? Sorry? Yes, it's the close of probation, but what way mark would that be? So my sister said it's the Sunday law.
Slightly after the Sunday law.
Slightly after the Sunday law.
Yes.
So a way mark. I had a discussion with one of my brothers earlier on that sometimes we get into a theory that we're between way marks. And I don't think we can be between way marks. We're either at a way mark or we're not at a way mark. We're in a verse or we're not in a verse. We're in a different verse. But you can't be between two verses, can you? Can we be between two verses? No? Are we sure? Okay, test question then. I thought I said I was going to ask it. I got provoked. Which verse are we in at the moment?
40.
Which verse are we in? Someone said verse 40. Everybody agree with that? Anybody disagree? Sorry? Daniel 11. They read Daniel 11. Yeah, obviously Daniel 11. Everybody agree we're in verse 40? Is someone not sure? You sure? Okay, so everyone's sure that we're in verse 40. Good. So, yes. So depending upon the group that you're talking about, that close of probation will be a different event or a different way mark. So for the world, for the whole world, everything, we're saying Daniel 12:1. For the Gentiles, or the 11th hour workers, or the Nephilims, what we're saying it's there. So my sister says Sunday law. Everybody agree with that? Sorry? Where's that? Where do you place the universal Sunday law? After Sunday law. Well, which way mark is that? So let me draw that. My brother says the universal Sunday law. So I've got the Sunday law, and you're going to say that's US, and this is, what event would this be?
No, we are going to have a national Sunday law Sunday.
I've got USA Sunday law, and you said universal Sunday law. So where do you place the universal one?
We are going to place it
here? Okay. So that's worldwide Sunday law. And where do you put Daniel 12:1? Here.
Yes.
So you're going to put it in the same place. So my brother says that the close of probation for 11th hour workers is Daniel 12:1. And my sister's saying it's here. So we've got two different answers. Why have we got two different answers? Okay, so we don't get too distracted on this. For a long time in our message, we used to teach it this way. (1989), 9/11, and we'll put Sunday law. Just as this is the reform line for the church. And then we'd say this: the first, second, and the third. Yes? Okay, so this is 1798, and this is the 19th of April, 44, and this is the 22nd of October, 44. So it works exactly the same way, the first, second, and third. So you know that Millerite history was a delineation of events that occurred under the first and second age of messages. So already we know for a long time that the first age of messages is a period of time, and the second is a period of time. And we always mark the third as a what? as a point. We marked it as a point in time. And then about 3 years ago, we began to understand Ezra 7. And then from Ezra 7, a whole flood of light happened, and we were forced to make a very major change in our message. And what was that change? Sorry? That the third angel's message is a period of time. So I'm going to take these out because they don't serve to make the point I want to. So since 2014 and onward, we've understood that the third angel's message is a period of time, not a point in time. Yes? So as soon as you start working that out and understanding it, then you're forced to address the issue. Because the third step is the close of probation. Yes? So the close of probation is the third step. Is it this one? Or is it this one? Is it the start, which I call the alpha, or the omega of the third step? Where would you mark the close of probation? At the beginning or the end? Some people are saying at the end.
Okay.
And some people are saying at the beginning.
Depending on the group, I can say depending on the groups.
No, this is one group. This is one group. Because each group has to go through the first, second and third step. So this is one group, which is why I took out the way marks. So this is generic. For any one group, the third step is now a period of time, it's not a point.
Okay, okay.
So now we have to ask ourselves the question, where do we mark the close of probation? Now when we weren't as careful, when we didn't understand our message too well, what we would do with the 11th hour workers, the world, we would mark that their close of probation is at Daniel 12:1. Yeah? Which is why some people have said that. But as soon as we began to understand the relationship between this beginning and end point of the third step, and what made us understand or discover that, how did we come to that conclusion? It's taken from what Bible chapter? Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 25. At midnight, there was a cry made. So in the verse, it says they happened at the same time, which is what we were doing. But then when you go to Ezra 7 and work out the reform line or the history of the Millerites in the year 1844, what do we realise? Which our brother mentioned earlier. That between midnight and the midnight cry is now a period of time. July 21st and August 14th/15th. So we see it's a period of time, so they're two separate way marks. So we can no longer say that the third step is a point, it has to be a period. So once you establish that truth, which for the line of the priest we now call midnight and the midnight cry, then we have to determine what point are we interested in. We're interested in the beginning. There's no point worrying about the end, because by then it's all finished. We want to be ready for this point, because we always want to be ready for the way mark that's going to come first. So now we understand that the close of probation for the priests in this context would be at the start of the third. Even though we may not fully understand or comprehend all that happens in this history, what we do know for sure is that probation closes here, and for sure there's an experience in this history, even though we may not fully understand or be able to describe it, but it's not the end point that we want to focus on, it's the beginning. So, if this was the line of the priests, we'll take that out, and then we'll go to the line of the 11th hour workers or the Nethinims. So this, what my brother will describe as the universal Sunday law, or Daniel 12:1, this is what we used to mark. But now we understand, because the third step is a period of time, now we have to deal with the US Sunday law. So what we identify now, when we talk about the close of probation for the world, we mark the beginning of it, not the conclusion of it. So that's all we're doing. So if you're not sure why we've changed from Daniel 12:1 to the Sunday law, it's because all we're doing is marking the beginning, not the end. So for many years you'll have heard that the close of probation for Adventism is when? Sunday law. And we don't teach that anymore, do we?
No.
We teach that the close of probation for Adventism is midnight cry. Because now we're marking the beginning of the third step for the Levites. So this would be midnight cry to the Sunday law, the US Sunday law. So we change this to the US Sunday law, and this would be midnight cry. So we're marking the close of probation here. Does that make sense? So I can't remember why we went rest off of that, but hopefully it's cleared that point up. Let's go back to Galatians chapter 4 and finish that thought off. Picking up from verse 21. Oh yes, I remember why we made that point. Because when you get to the close of probation, God's going to enter into covenant with you before that event happens. That's the point we want to pick up. And it varies between each group. When you take the 3 decrees of the 7 Persian kings, Cyrus, Darius and Artaxerxes, and we spoke about the 3 models, agriculture, marriage and building. On the building one, it's the easiest one to see, I think, because there's very little argument against this. When is the temple complete? Under what decree? The first, second or third?
Second.
Because some people said the third, but if you look carefully, we'd see that it's under the second decree. Under the second decree, under Darius' decree, the temple is complete. And the temple is a sanctuary, and it's a symbol of the church. And in the context that we discuss in our generation, it's the church triumphant. So you know the church triumphant is going to be ready and complete before the close of probation. So every way you want to understand that, you know that before the close of probation, before the third step, you have to have already entered into covenant with God's people. We can see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Another point that we bring up, and there are many ways to prove this, but I'll just do it in a simple way, is that when you enter into covenant with God, He then begins to test you. Yeah? He won't test you before that. Why won't He test you before? Because you have to, yeah, but that's just a self-circular argument. I want to know why. Who are you before that? You're a heathen. And you're not joining the army. So He doesn't expect much of you. You're not going through boot camp. You're not being tested. You're not being trained. Yeah? So, when did God enter into covenant with His people? Here in this story. At Harare, remember? Which is the beginning of the 40-year wilderness wandering. And what we can see is, once He enters into covenant with them, in fact, although we mark Horeb as the entry into covenant, officially, He really entered into covenant with them a little bit before that. And by the time they get to this point here, which is Kadesh Barnea, He says, you've been tested 10 times. and you've failed every single one of the tests. What's the first test that they would have failed? The Red Sea crossing. And sometimes we think, oh, they passed that test because they went through. You know, just because you're here in the congregation and you made it, doesn't mean you're passing tests. Just because you're standing behind Moses and you sneak through with him, doesn't mean you pass the test. There are very few people who passed that test at the Red Sea crossing. Very few people did. And as you go on, they failed test after test after test until you get to Kadesh Barnea, and he says, 10th and last final test, no more. Probation ends for these people. And then he enters in the covenant with two men, Caleb, Joshua. So, as soon as he enters into covenant, he begins a testing process with you. So, another simple one that we all know is Jacob. So what does Jacob mean? Stealer, supplanter, deceiver, the one who tricks his brother. So, here he is, he's tricked his brother, and his brother's now going to kill him, and he's going to run away. And where's he running away to? So, do you know where he's running away to? To Laban. Do you know where Laban lives? My brother Elisha, where does he live? Sorry?
Mesopotamia.
Yeah, but specifically, because you mentioned it today.
In the wilderness.
Where in Mesopotamia? Haran. And that becomes important. We won't do it today, but we'll do it now. I'll try and remember to do that one as well. Because who comes out of Haran? Abraham. Abraham comes out of Haran and goes to where? To Canaan. And Jacob leaves and goes to Haran. So you know you have a chiasm there, straight away. So there's a relationship between Jacob and Abraham with respect to covenant, because one's fleeing to Haran and one's fleeing to Haran. So here we are, but before we get to Haran, where's he going to be? Bethel. How old is he when he's in Bethel? Do we know? He's 77 years old. So we have a doubling there. So he's at Bethel, and what's going to happen now? He's 77. By the way, you know he's 84 when he gets married. I knew you were thinking that. 84 when he gets married. You're never too old to marry. You can be too young, but you're never too old. Oh, that reminds me, just an aside. Everybody's got copies of the notes, except me. No, I mean, whoever's going to get the notes, that's all there is. I don't have notes for these presentations, but I do have notes, so I'm going to do some studies on courtship and marriage and social purity, that type of thing. But if someone would give me their notes that I could use. The only reason I do that, I put it on my computer, but I don't have the same pagination, so I couldn't tell you what page to go to and to find it. So it'd be easy if you're going to go through the notes with me during class. Or perhaps I could get a digital copy, one of the two. Someone could think about that. Anyway, so he marries here at he's at 77, he's at Bethel. And what's he going to do at Bethel? He's going to enter into covenant. There are a number of ways to be able to understand where this waymark is in our history. But do we have an understanding that this is 9/11?
Yes.
Yeah? Even if you want to do it at a simple level, we have a doubling, or the second angel's message. The second angel's message arrives at 9/11. So I can put 9/11 here. We have, a different way to do it. We've got angels ascending and descending. The angel of Revelation 18 descends. The angel of Revelation 7 ascends, sends out the east. We have angels ascending and descending here at Bethel. He says, this is the house of God, the gate of heaven. The house of God is the church. The church begins, church triumphant, at one level, begins to be constructed here at 9/11. It's the gate of heaven. A gate is a symbol of a church. So you have two symbols of the churches. There's a number of things here. There's a stone that he lays his head upon. So I'm saying that this is a covenant that he enters into. What's he been doing all of his life? For 77 years. His name is Jacob. He's been deceiving. Is he I-E or E-I? So he's been deceiving all of his life, and he's ever been punished for it. Has God ever said, you deceived your brother when you were 24, I'm going to make you pay for this now? No. Why? Because he's a heathen. Even though he has the promise of the inheritance, he's in a lost and undone condition, and God will not do anything with him. He won't touch him. But here he enters into covenant. And now he's going to go to Harare, and what's the first thing that happens to him when he gets there? He's deceived. And then deceived. And then deceived. For the rest of his mortal life. So afterwards, he's tested. So we want to think about this. When you enter into covenant with God, all the sins of your past, you begin to pay for them now. They come back to haunt you with a vengeance.
Amen.
That someone's positive about this. But it is positive because God does it for a reason. It's to refine and purify our characters. So if you wonder why trials and tribulations come, often they're because of the sins of our youth, which God never touched us for until he entered into covenant. So I've given you two simple examples. There are much more robust ways to do that. But I'll just give you two examples that you can show. When you enter into covenant, a testing process begins. So, another way of describing covenant is marriage. So when you get married, you become one flesh. And in our message, what's the classic symbol of becoming one flesh with Christ? Where we speak about humanity and divinity. But what's the Bible verses that we go to? Revelation 10, Ezekiel 2, Jeremiah 15. We often go to Deuteronomy 18. But there are more Bible verses than that. There are a number of Bible verses that talk about what? Eating the book. The book is divinity. And when you eat divinity, it becomes part of you. You become one flesh with divinity. Humanity and divinity combined. And where do we eat? At 9/11. So we enter into covenant at 9/11. We've got many ways to understand that with the reform lines. Baptism. We could go to April the 19th. We could go to August the 11th. There are many ways of understanding how we enter into covenant with God. But the eating of the book is the easiest one to see, I think. And once that happens, then a testing process begins. So, who is it that tests us? You know when you have children, you say, You're trying my patience. And if you say that as a parent, yeah, then sometimes you shake them. No, you don't shake them, do you? We didn't say that you tested my patience, yes? Who tests the patience of the saints from 9/11? Who joined the movement at 9/11? According to Matthew 13. The tares. I'm suggesting that the tares were allowed to enter into our movement to bring tests and trial upon us. So God would be able to see whether or not we can behave properly when we deal with tares. What does the Bible say? If you had run with the footmen, and who are the footmen? Israel, Judah, your brethren. If you had run with them and they've tired you out, and you get into a fight with a tare, and you're rude and disrespectful. By the way, we keep note on WhatsApp chats. And so we keep an eye on your bad behaviour. If you can't cope with dealing with brethren who are on this message in a respectful and decent fashion when you argue with them, what hope do you have when you start dealing with Rome, when the chariots and horsemen come? So the tares were introduced into our movement to test and refine and develop our character.
Amen.
And because we're so hard-hearted, it's taken a long time for that to happen. Now there are disadvantages in having tares, because they stifle growth as well. Not only did they aid in growth, character development, and make you stronger, but they also stifle growth. Stifling the growth is that the Lord designed that He would give us truth. And those truths have been systematically taken off course, subtly changed over and over again by tares. And I don't mean they even do it maliciously. It's just that they're there and it happens. It's a prophetic truth. So what would you expect to happen when tares begin to leave? If the tares were retarding the truth and the tare leaves, what would you expect to happen?
Truth grows.
The truth would suddenly burst out because it's been restrained and restricted. Yes? When did we have a flood of light enter into this movement? 2014. Ezra chapter 7. So what would that teach you about the relationship of the wheat and tares? If we had this sudden flash of light that's been waiting to burst forth, being retarded by tares, what would that teach you? That some tares have left. Tares have left the movement because they were stifling the truth of Ezra 7. And that wasn't the end of the history or the dynamics between the wheat and the tares. So, in summary, we didn't even get to Galatians chapter 4. In summary, we've spoken about entering into new covenant. We've spoken about it happens after this wilderness wandering or this persecution or punishment, what we call the period of darkness. We've seen that our reform line is nothing more than God desiring to redeem His people from a lost, sin-sick condition. It's a message of judgment and a message of hope. You have to accept it. We understand that it's a prophetic gospel, a prophetic testing message. And it's something strange and new that no pastor or rabbi is ever going to teach. We saw that from Thoughts on the Mount of Blessings, page 6, paragraph 1. This message captivates It has such power, it holds you spellbound, even if you don't fully understand everything. When you enter into covenant, it doesn't happen at the end, it happens at the beginning. And once it happens, you begin to get tested. And the means that God is going to test his people, the wheat, by, is the tares. The tares help this movement to grow strong, to develop character, but it also retards truth. The retardation of truth begins to stop once the tares begin to leave. So we need to understand the relationship between wheat and tares. It's a truth that's been in this movement for around 12 months now, and there's still much confusion on the issue. So we want to try and address some of those issues. And finally, we had a short diversion about close of probation and the third step. It's no longer a point, but it's a period in time. And now when we think about the close of probation, we mark the beginning of the period, not the end. So we now mark midnight cry, and the Sunday law for the close of probation for the three groups, not the midnight cry, Sunday law, and Daniel 12:1, which will mark in the final or end points of the third step. Now we mark the beginning. Let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your watch care over your people. Lord, we thank you above all things that you are in control. Lord, as we realise the implications of our past lives, how many of those character traits are still deeply embedded within us and they need to be taken out. And it's through this testing process that you do that. We are fearful for the trials that are currently happening and that still await us. But also, Lord, we're thankful because we know that you chastise only those people that you love. We thank you, Father, like Jacob, that you are more than willing to enter into covenant with us. Lord, please help each of us to understand the purpose of us being here this week. Help us to gain an understanding of the truths that you have prepared for us, that we might not only receive a blessing, that we might also share those blessings with others. Be with us and bless us, Father, as we begin to come to the closing moments of this Sabbath day. Help us to still regard these closing moments. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.